175 of our 365-day Bible read. Today, from the Old Testament, we're going to be reading Esther chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll do the Bible study for Esther chapters 1, 2, and 3, and then we're going to go on over to the New Testament and we will read Acts chapter 5, verse 1 through 16. And then tomorrow we will finish Acts chapter 5 and do the Bible study for Acts chapter 5 tomorrow. I already started this live like an hour ago or so. But my son, he woke up from he woke up. So yeah, he just isn't having a good night. So hopefully he doesn't wake up again. If so, my husband will get him. But sometimes he wants me. So if that happens again, I'm just going to um, tonight's just not his night, so I'll just end the live and that'll be our day. And whenever I don't finish, we'll just finish tomorrow. Because the other live, I deleted that. And so, yeah, I'm back on and I'm starting again. So, whew, yes. So, okay, so we're going to get started though. We're starting a new book of the Bible today, Esther. And we'll be on this for 3 days, I believe. We'll be on the book of Esther. It's a really, really short book of the Bible. And yeah, then we'll be starting the book of Job after 3 days. So that's exciting. Job is, I love it. I love it. I love it. It's one of my favorite books in the Bible. So, yes. All right. So we're going to get started here now. Okay. Esther chapter 1. I had almost like finished the whole chapter. I read almost the entire chapter of chapter 1 already. But yeah, I'm going to read it again. Because like I said, I deleted the other live. Okay. The King's Banquet. Esther chapter 1. Now, in the days of Ahasuerus, the Ahasuerus who reigned from India to Ethiopia over 127 provinces, in those days when King Ahasuerus sat on his royal throne in Susa, the citadel, in the 3rd year of his reign, he gave a feast for all his officials and servants. The army of Persia and Media and the nobles and governors of the provinces were before him, while he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor and pomp of his greatness for many days, 180 days. And when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white cotton curtains and violet hangings fastened with cords of fine linen and purple to silver rods and marble pillars, and also couches of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of potpourri, marble, mother of pearl, and precious stones. Drinks were served in golden vessels, vessels of different kinds, and the royal wine was lavished according to the bounty of the king. And drinking was according to this edict: there is no compulsion. For the king had given orders to all the staff of his palace to do as each man desired. Queen Vashti also gave a feast for the women in the palace that belonged to King Ahasuerus. Queen Vashti's refusal. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 eunuchs who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus to bring Queen Vashti before the king with her royal crown in order to show the peoples and the princes her beauty, for she was lovely to look at. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, delivered by the eunuchs. At this, the king became enraged, and his anger burned within him. Then the king said to the wise men who knew the times, for this was the king's procedure toward all who were versed in law and judgment, the men next to him being Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Maris, Marcina, and Memacon, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who saw the king's face and sat first in the kingdom, according to the law, what is to be done to Queen Vashti, because she has not performed the command of King Ahasuerus delivered by the eunuchs. Then Memacon said in the presence of the king and the officials, not only against the king has Queen Vashti done wrong, but also against all the officials and all the peoples who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. For the queen's behavior will be made known to all women, causing them to look at their husbands with contempt, since they will say, King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she did not come. This very day the noble women of Persia and Media, who have heard of the queen's behavior, will say the same to all the king's officials, and there will be contempt and wrath in plenty. If it please the king, let a royal order go out from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it may not be repelled, that Vashti is never again to come before King Ahasuerus. And let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. So when the decree made by the king is proclaimed throughout all his kingdom, for it is vast, all women will give honor to their husbands, high and low alike. This advice pleased the king and the princes, and the king did as Memacon proposed. He sent letters to all the royal provinces, to every province in its own script, and to every people in its own language, that every man be master in his own household and speak according to the language of his people. All right, so that was Esther chapter 1 that we just started today, a new book. So we're now going to do the Bible study for Esther chapter 1. Who was king and queen during the time, Esther chapter 1 Bible study. Who was king and queen during the time of Esther? King Ahasuerus and Queen Vashti of the Persian Empire were during the time of Esther. Oh, did I say, I'm going to read this over. Okay. Who was king and queen during the time of Esther? King Ahasuerus and Queen Vashti of the Persian Empire were during the time of Esther. Okay. What was the king celebrating? The king was showing off his great riches and glorious kingdom to his officials and servants. Who did the king hold a feast for at the end of his celebration for his officials and servants? The king held a feast for all the people in the city, from great to small. What did the king want from the queen? The king also wanted to show off his beautiful queen to the people. What fear did the king and his officials have of the people when the queen refused to come to the king? The king and officials feared that all the wives of the officials would also despise their husbands, refuse to listen to them, and all the women of the land would soon master their husbands. What was done to the queen? Queen Vashti was removed from before the king, never to come before him again. Her crown was taken away to be given to another who would honor the king. All right, so that was Esther chapter 1 Bible study. We're now going to read Esther chapter 2 and then do the Bible study for Esther chapter 2. Okay, I'm trying to get this like eye level with myself. I got like a new setup going on. Okay, sitting on this bench chair. Okay. All right. Okay, Esther chapter 2. All right. Esther chosen queen. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus had abated, he remembered Vashti and what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's young men who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought out for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather all the beautiful young virgins to the harem in Susa the citadel, under custody of Haggai, the king's eunuch, who is in charge of the women. Let their cosmetics be given them, and let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti." This pleased the king, and he did so. Now, there was a Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. He was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at. And when her father and her mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So when the king's order and his edict were proclaimed, and when many young women were gathered in Susa, the citadel, in custody of Haggai, Esther also was taken into the king's palace and put in custody of Haggai, who had charge of the women. And the young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Now, when the turn came for each young woman to go in to King Ahasuerus, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. When the young woman went in to the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in, and in the morning, she would return to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She would not go in to the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go in to the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Now Esther was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Mordecai discovers a plot. Now, when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows. And it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. All right, that was Esther chapter 2. We're now going to do the Bible study for Esther chapter 2. Oh, I'm out of breath. Okay. All right. Esther chapter 2 Bible study. Who was sought for the king to replace Queen Vashti? Beautiful young virgins were sought to be the new queen. Who was Esther? Esther was a Jew and the cousin of Mordecai. She was raised by Mordecai because her parents were not alive. What type of preparations did the women go through before seeing the king? The women went through 12 months of preparations for beautifying themselves, 6 months of oil of myrrh and 6 months of perfumes. What did Mordecai discover during the preparation time of the virgins? Mordecai discovered that 2 of the king's eunuchs had plotted to harm the king. Mordecai sent word to the king through Esther, and the 2 men were hanged. All right, so that was Esther chapter 2 Bible study. We're now going to read Esther chapter 3 and then do the Bible study for Esther chapter 3 before going over to the New Testament. Esther chapter 3. Human plots against the Jews. After these things, King Ahasuerus promoted Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set his throne above all the officials who were with him. And all the king's servants who were at the king's gate bowed down and paid homage to the Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. Then the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you transgress the king's command?" And when they spoke to him day after day, and he would not listen to them, they told Haman in order to see whether Mordecai's words would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage to him, Haman was filled with fury. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. So as they had made known to him the people of Mordecai, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast that is, they cast lots before Haman day after day, and they cast it month after month till the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of every other people, and they do not keep the king's laws, so that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. If it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business, that they may put it into the king's treasuries." So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews. And the king said to Haman, "The money is given to you, the people also, to do with them as it seems good to you." Then the king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and an edict, according to all that Haman commanded, was written to the king's satraps, and to the governors over all the provinces, and to the officials of all the peoples, to every province in its own script, and every people in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent with couriers to all the king's provinces with instruction to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, in one day, the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their goods. A copy of the document was to be issued as a decree in every province by proclamation to all the peoples to be ready for that day. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king, and the decree was issued in Susa, the citadel, and the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. All right, so that was Esther chapter 3. We're now going to do the Bible study for Esther chapter 3. All right, Esther chapter 3 Bible study. Who did the king promote to second in command above all his princes? The king promoted Haman above all other officials. Why did Haman despise Mordecai? Mordecai would not bow or pay homage to Haman. What plan did Haman devise against Mordecai and his people? Haman brought a false accusation against the Jews before the king, accusing them of not keeping the king's laws. Therefore, they were not to remain alive. All right, so that was the Bible study for Esther chapter 3. We're now going over to the New Testament, and we're going to start, we're going to start Acts chapter 5 by reading verse 1 through 16, and then we're going to finish Acts chapter 5 tomorrow and do the Bible study for Acts chapter 5 tomorrow. All right, Acts chapter 5, starting verse 1, let's see, we're 16. All right, we're going to stop at verse 16. Okay, Acts chapter 5. Ananias and Sapphira. But a man named Ananias, with his wife Sapphira, sold a piece of property, and with his wife's knowledge, he kept back for himself some of the proceeds and brought only a part of it and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Aeneas, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and to keep back for yourself part of the proceeds of the land? While it remained unsold, did it not remain your own? And after it was sold, was it not at your disposal? Why is it that you have contrived this deed in your heart? You have not lied to man, but to God. When Aeneas heard these words, he fell down and breathed his last, and great fear came upon all who heard of it. The young men rose and wrapped him up and carried him out and buried him. After an interval of about 3 hours, his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter said to her, Tell me whether you sold the land for so much. And she said, Yes, for so much. But Peter said to her, How is it that you have agreed together to test the Spirit of the Lord? Behold, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. When the young men came in, they found her dead, and they carried her out and buried her beside her husband. And great fear came upon the whole church and upon all who heard of these things. Many signs and wonders done. Now, many signs and wonders were regularly done among the people by the hands of the apostles. And they were all together in Solomon's portico. None of the rest dared join them, but the people held them in high esteem. And more than ever, believers were added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that they even carried out the sick into the streets and laid them on cots and mats, that as Peter came by, at least his shadow might fall on some of them. The people also gathered from the towns around Jerusalem, bringing the sick and those afflicted with unclean spirits, and they were all healed. All right, so that was Acts chapter 5, verse 1 through 16. We are now done for today. We're going to finish Acts chapter 5 tomorrow, and we'll do the Bible study for Acts chapter 5 tomorrow. We are splitting some of the chapters up of the New Testament into 2 days, just so that we'll be able to read both Old and New Testament daily. There's less books of the Bible in the New Testament, so If we didn't split the chapters up into 2 days, we'd finish reading the New Testament before we finish reading the Old Testament, and we don't want that problem. So that's why we're splitting them up into 2 days. Some of the chapters. I'm following a year reading Bible schedule from esv.org. So this is how they do it. So, yes, so a quick recap of what we did tonight. From the Old Testament, we read Esther chapters 1, 2, and 3. And then we did the Bible studies for Esther chapters 1, 2, and 3. We have 2 more days of the book of Esther, and then we'll be starting the book of Job. So, yes, Esther is very short. But after reading Esther chapters 1, 2, and 3 and doing the Bible study for them, we just went to the New Testament and read Acts chapter 5, verse 1 through 16. And then we're going to finish it tomorrow and do the Bible study for Acts chapter 5 tomorrow. So I love you guys. God loves you. You are valuable. You are worthy. You are enough. You matter. You are beautiful. And God loves you. And I love you. And I'll see you tomorrow for day 176. Almost a half a year.